and guests. It's my pleasure to introduce to you this morning a lovely lady called Jill Walker. Jill is a CRM consultant, and I'm sure she'll tell us what CRM is all about, who has worked personally halfway around the globe in the field of advising businesses of all sizes how to leverage technology to bring back the personal touch. She's been doing this for 14 years. For the last 12 years, Sydney has been her home, improving. She was once described, and I'm quoting, as the most technical, non-technical person in the CRM team. And this helped me give Jill a very warm city business swap.
So what CRM delivers to the savvy business? I'd like to start this presentation by asking a couple of questions. Given that we're all in business, who here has a bank? Who here has a bank manager? Who here knows their bank manager? Okay, 3 out of a dozen. So we have 12, 12, 3, I think, from current numbers, which is interesting. We all have a bank, and only 3 of us know the bank manager. I'd now like you to think a little bit about your relationship with your bank or your bank manager and how that has changed over the last really 2 generations. So I'd like you to think for a moment about your grandfather's relationship with his bank and his bank manager. The chances are that your grandfather, regardless of his walk in life, had a very personal relationship with the bank and the bank manager. When he had a need of the bank, and in the case of the grandfather, I think we can reasonably safely talk totally masculine, since I'm sure women weren't allowed to have such things as money in the time that we're now talking about. So when he had a need of a service from the bank, he probably went into the bank and he had a one-on-one meeting with the manager. That meeting would have been accompanied by some large ledgers, quite likely even handwritten ledgers. The details of your grandfather's account will have been held and managed totally by hand. The saying, in fact, being in the red, which I'm sure everybody knows, if not from personal experience, comes from those days when you owed money to the bank, the amount was written in red ink rather than in black, which everything else was recorded in. So it's definitely a personal relationship, and personal to the level that the bank manager and your grandfather almost certainly lived in the same town, and they probably socialised in the same circles, and perhaps, if your grandfather did such a thing, even did the shopping together. Or not together, but in the same shops. I'd now like you to move forward and think about your father's relationship with his bank manager. It will have changed, and by your father's time, there is almost certainly some technology has crept in there, at least as far as using ATMs rather than going into the branch when cash is required. The relationship will also have become somewhat more distant, in that there's a lot more letters and distance correspondence being used, perhaps even email. And the most notable change at that point is, instead of having 1 or perhaps 2 bank managers for a lifetime or a business lifetime, the bank manager now is changing every 3 to 4 years on average. And I'd now like you to contrast that with your relationship with your bank and bank manager. And if you're anything like me, I'm sure that your relationship with your bank is very largely remote. Your interactions with your bank and bank manager are quite likely email, internet, perhaps the occasional letter, and telephone. And when you call, you're not calling your branch, your manager. The chances are you're calling a call centre. and that call centre is probably not even in the city where you live. I personally know that I have not been to the suburb where my branch is held for over a year, and that's for any reason. I'm not talking about visiting the branch. I have not been into Eastwood for over a year. I do have a business banker, as I'm sure all of you do, but I can safely say he hasn't got a clue about my needs. Every time I talk to him, which is not very often, he is dead set on selling me a car loan. And it doesn't matter how often I tell him that I don't need a new car, I don't want a new car, I don't need a car loan, he is selling me a car loan. So we can see in just the space of 2 generations, we've got a massive change in relationships, from a very personal relationship where very little support beyond pen and paper was needed because the supplier knew what he needed to know in order to make the decisions of whether or not to provide the service that it's his role to provide. Down to a system where we've got rapid turnover, we've got different people every time we phone, we've got different people taking the call. So how on earth can the modern situation in many organisations provide the service that most of us want from our suppliers? That slide, which is very complicated, but the detail of it is not that important, is depicting the change in emotions that somebody buying a product and trying to use that product through an internet supplier may go through. So we've got finding a product that we think would be useful, placing an order, and so it goes on. More than half of those data points are above the midline. So we can look here at this being emotionally neutral, emotionally good, and emotionally unpleasant. So superficially, we might think that that relationship overall is good. However, if we were to ask that customer what their thoughts about the supplier are, we would probably get a much more negative story than we expect. And the reason is that research has shown us that there are 2 interactions in every customer relationship that have the most bearing on how you feel about that supplier. And those 2 interactions are the 2 on the right-hand end that I've highlighted in yellow. They are the most recent and the one that is emotionally furthest away from the neutral point. So this one could have been almost anywhere in the timeline, this point there, but because it just happens in this instance to be towards the end. So that customer, if we were to ask them, is probably going to give us a story that this supplier is not good at all. And what they will focus on is that they had to repeat their story 3 times and to different people. They got passed around for whatever reason. And then in spite of having repeated it 3 times, the technician still arrived with no information on the problem. So I think we can safely say that whether or not this organisation has a CRM solution, certainly the people who have dealt with this poor individual are not using it in the way that a successful CRM is used. That doesn't mean that they're not using it the way their management has told them to use it, but it means that they're not using it the way CRM should be used if we're going to use that in order to support our customers. Is when this starts to work, CRM, and that stands for Customer Relationship Management, or sometimes Client Relationship Management. It has also in the last few years, particularly by Microsoft, come to mean Partner Relationship Management. It can be used for Supplier Relationship Management, and there's a whole heap of other systems out there: tenant, student, pupil, patient, a whole range of things. But all of those are really variations on customers or clients. So what exactly is CRM? CRM is something that helps the people who are helping your clients know what they need to know, when they need to know it, to get on better with those clients and prospects for the whole of the lifetime of their relationship with you. What CRM therefore does, because of improving the relationship, is it changes and increases the speed at which a relationship between two people can go from barely knowing somebody to liking them than it used to be. The real value comes once you've been running a CRM solution for a while and you are building up a body of information about your clients and about other similar clients, so that you have got information readily available to all of the people who need it about how you have met needs previously, be they the previous needs of that client or similar needs of other clients. You can use that to provide a better service to your current clients and prospects. So looking at how CRM can help you. Having a CRM solution embedded into your business can enable you to start collecting information about your prospects even before they have shared their name with you. When people go to a website, they are looking for some sort of information. Maybe they'll fill in a form or they'll watch a video. They don't give you their name at this point, typically. But we can start gathering that information and storing it in such a way that if they continue their relationship, they then do give us a name or an organisation, and we can backtrack and pull in various other things that we found out about them before we knew their name. I'd like you now, just for a minute or so, to think about customer experiences that you have had and how that sort of lead generation opportunities have gone really fairly horribly awry. And I know you've got a really good one. Has anyone else got anything before David's? Got a dedicated fax line, which, and so on and so forth. And there's one client, and of course, probably more, because, okay, David hasn't shared the name of the organisation, but I'm sure if I asked him, he would. They have lost not only David as a client, but they've probably lost other people since David has told this story a number of times. So that's an example of what not to do, although there's an organisation that almost certainly has CRM technology, but what they don't have is a CRM strategy and philosophy throughout the organisation that is being followed. The second point I made is CRM can help you convert more of your leads into paying customers. The slide that's up at the moment is a business process that one of our clients wanted to implement, where they could guarantee that every prospect who approached them via email or the website got a call back within 4 hours or 4 business hours. This was achieved using CRM, and the real benefit of that for this particular client is within 4 hours of making an approach, there is somebody who knows the products and services, and this organisation offers hosting, and it's a fairly complex product catalogue. So somebody has spoken to the client and has got detailed requirements of what they require, and has invested a little bit of time in really understanding the problem that the IT manager, and all of their clients typically are IT managers, so the problems that they have got, and they have really cut down on the time that is available for a competitor to get in there and start telling them about why they are better and so on. So they now close a lot more of their prospects than they did when they didn't have a system that ensured that all of these callbacks happened within 4 hours. We also were able to put in place the solution so that if the agent in question misses the call, it is escalated up to a manager, and all of that is just happening in background. Another example of that is an organisation that sells internationally and has to sell off 20 different price lists. So they've got 5 currencies and 4 different price lists depending on the level of partner that you are. That meant that they had, every time there was a change in their prices, which happened 2 or 3 times a year, it took about a week for them to work through and update all of the price lists and get the information out to the various partners who were selling on their behalf. CRM was implemented in such a way as to convert that week-long intensive process into a 30-minute background process that could be run at the click of a button.
Jill, if I can just recount something on
Sure.
quite a grand scale, the recent elections in the US. David Axelrod was the campaign director, and one of the key things that he implemented was what they now call big data, which was a very comprehensive database on the voters out there, and unlike swing voters here, it's a matter of can they get them to vote. And so the data they had on individuals in the Obama camp was far more extensive than the opposition, and was credited as being the reason they got up in the end. An example was they had a system right down to the individual, and they knew he may not get to the voting station to vote, so they had a process to ring that individual, someone to ring that individual to make sure that he got along. So that's an example of knowing who your target audience is and what you need to do to be successful with them.
Absolutely.
And it all comes
Good
back
example.
to data. It comes back to the quality of data that you have.
And the use of the data, the quality, but also using it appropriately. Okay, I'm getting the sign to move on. So
we're almost on 9.
Okay. These final examples, the wine selectors are people who really increase the frequency of a sale because they know what you've bought previously. And when they ring, they will greet you with, I understand that you recently bought a particular wine. Did you enjoy it? If you answer in the affirmative, they then offer you a later vintage or a similar wine. And that has shown they get, not surprisingly, a far greater number of sales from their call centre than if there was a very bland, we've just got this wine and would you like to try it sort of approach. And then just to finish, I'd like to look at 2 of probably the most famous examples of adding products to a sale. So we've got a customer, they've wanted to buy something. The first one is McDonald's, would you like fries with that? And McDonald's have very successfully added millions of dollars to their bottom line by selling fries with an awful lot of orders. The second one is Amazon, who, when you express an interest in a particular book, you get a web page that says people who like this also bought, and showing you books by the same author on a similar topic. So there we've got a number of examples of using human components of CRM in order to get more leads, convert more leads, sell more frequently, and to do it across the board with less effort. So thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Thank you.